Welcome back to another episode of Close to Broke. My name is Kieran and it's a pleasure to have you guys back. Today we're going to be playing our very first ever private game here at the bike, 10, 20, 40. Quickly, before we get into today's episode, I want to let you guys know a couple of really important announcements. We're going to be hosting our very first meetup game in the East Coast at Baltimore at the Horseshoe Casino. I'm going to be doing that with my very good friend Wolfgang Alexander. It should be a wonderful time. I'm going to be playing 2-3 $500 max. Enough of the blabbering. Let's get into some high stakes sessions here at the Bicycle Casino. Today we are playing some of the largest stakes I've ever played in my life in the privacy and comfort of the high limit section at the bike. Today's game is a 10, 20, 40. We start off in for $7,000. Let's see how we fare in today's session. Very early on, I'm trying to get my wits about me. My nerves are there. I'm not going to lie to you this time around. This means a lot to me in a lot of different ways. Considering where I started, I was playing poker for kind of like pennies compared to this just a few years back. And over some time and some things happening, we're lucky enough to be in a situation where we can afford to play games like this. Anyways, we start off this session five-handed. Under the gun opens to $50. I'm here in the cutoff with pocket nines. We can go two ways, which is calling or three betting. And in this configuration, because we are five-handed, I don't actually mind taking over the reins of the hand and doing the old three bet. I make it $150 to go. 3x seems perfectly reasonable here. The big blind decides to make the old cold call. And the under the gun player folds. We're going heads up to a flop that comes Jack 10, 6, 3 hearts. Pretty weird flop for our hand specifically. The good thing is we do hold the 9 of hearts, but otherwise there are 2 overs and a ton of equity for drawing hands. When the opposition checks it over to me, I mumble over my options, but I think this is a very easy check back at the end of the day, which is what I do. Looking for some sort of improvement, and the turn comes just what the doctor ordered, as it is the Queen of Hearts. So now we have an open-ended straight flush draw as well as a made flush. When my opponent leads out for $80, there's nothing to do here besides just make the call. There's not a ton of better hands than me at this point besides specifically an ace or a king of hearts. Very much possible for my opponent, but like I said, can't be folding these hands as of yet. We're going off to a river that comes an ace of diamonds. So we don't improve, but we still have a flush. The good thing is my opponent decides to check it over to me. I think this would be a little too thin to be going for value. My opponent should be and could be checking a king of hearts here. And if that's the case, we're obviously never getting him to fold that. So what are we trying to do if we bet here? I think it'd almost be kind of like a bluff. Depending on the sizing, if I go very small, sure, in some aspects, I can get maybe a crying call from like an 8s or a 7s with a heart. But at the end of the day, I end up checking it back, playing this a little more conservatively, a little more passively. I showed down my 9s with the 9 of hearts, and it is good. Starting off on the right foot. As we mentioned briefly earlier, I think the nerves are starting to settle. I feel like I belong here, and it's actually a really fun environment. These private games, to be honest, kind of make me feel like I never want to play regular poker. It's just significantly more fun. The people like poker. They like people. It's very personable. The environment is really infectious almost. And yeah, these guys were outstanding. Anyways, moving along, I'm starting to get my wits about me, as I mentioned. And the cutoff decides to raise it over to $100. There is a $40 straddle on, and that is the position I'm in. The button decides to make the call of 100. The small blind decides to 3-bet to 470 bucks. It folds over to me in the straddle, hoping for a premium, and that is exactly what happens as we look down at ace king. A sight for sore eyes, as we've been kind of folding a little bit early on. We're going to be 4-betting here 100% of the time, it feels like, especially considering how deep we are. The effective stack for my opponent from the small blind is around $3,500. We make it $910. It folds all the way back around to the small blind, who decides just to flat. The flop comes Queen 4-4 with 2 hearts on a spade. This is a very, very boring and static flop texture. Not a whole lot of availability for any of us to go about. The one thing I will add is that since he was a 3-better and he did call a 4-bet, it's a little unlikely that my opponent has a suited hand because he would have to have specifically ace king of hearts, I think, for this to make any sense. Possibly ace jack of hearts if he's willing to call that weak as well. When he checks it over to me, I decide to c-bet here for $440. We're going to be betting our entire range here. He can obviously have ace queen in this spot. He can also be having ace king. He could have jacks, 10s. So he's probably going to call this bet 100% of the time, which he does. We're going off to a turn card that comes with 3 of clubs. On cards like this that don't change a lot to the board texture, I don't mind playing them a little more aggressive. When he checks it over to me, he has right around $2,000 effective behind. And I don't think there's anything to do here besides go for the old jam. The reason being is I still block aces and kings, and those are the hands that I'm repping in this point. I am obviously worried about the possibility for my opponent to have ace queen or queens, but I think ace queen can consider folding like once in a blue moon, and every other hand is probably folding as well. By I mean other hands, I mean other pairs. I feel like jacks, 10s, and 9s are put in a really tough spot and probably have to make a hero fold. So after I decide to jam for $2,000, my opponent quickly folds. He was kind enough to later tell me that he had ace jack with the ace of hearts. That makes sense to me. I think it is a little weak to call out of position to a 4-bet, but again, because of my sizing, it makes his range, you know, eligible to be a little more wider, it feels like pre-flop. Either way, we're happy to take it down. Another big pot heading in our direction, and we're playing pretty decent, I feel like, at this point, but obviously not great. As we continue to move along, under the gun decides to make it $60. The straddle is off on this hand. The cutoff makes the call, and we're here on the button. We look down at ace 7 of hearts. Nice hand to put into our 3-betting range from the button, as it works as a good bluff candidate. I make it $200. Only the initial raiser makes the call. We're going off to a flop that comes jack 9 deuce rainbow. I decide to c-bet for $150. Be doing this with my entire range at the end of this board texture. I don't think I'd have a large sizing here. He decides to make the call, and the turn comes to 3 of spades. This is an instance where, as I've mentioned in the past, I'd definitely like to have larger bomb sizings on turn cards that don't really change the board dynamics a great deal. So when the opponent checks over to me, I decide to bet $700, a really massive sizing. My opponent thinks about it for a brief moment before eventually deciding to fold. Nice to take a hand down with the ace high. We're continuing to move along on a session that's been going pretty decent for us. Not a great deal of time has passed before we get to the next hand. We look down at jack 10 of clubs. Great hand to be opening from early position. I think we're playing 6-handed at this point. We make it $60 as the straddle is off. The +1 position decides to 3-bet us to $220. Really like his sizing a lot, quite a bit actually. Even going a little larger is probably a good idea. When it folds over to me, I decide to make the call. I'll be defending this very often, and 4-betting seems kind of ridiculous. So we're going to a flop that comes jack 8 deuce rainbow. The action checks over to the initial raiser. He decides to c-bet for $220. As we've learned from the past, it'd be severely overplaying my hand if I raise here. I would definitely consider raising if there was a flush draw on the board texture, because I feel like there'd be more hands that we'd be able to get some value from. But at the very time, considering how reasonably static this board texture is, besides queen 10 and 10-9 suited, I don't see a ton of options for draws. So I decide to just make the call. The turn card is a pretty decent one as it comes the 9 of diamonds. It does bring a straight draw here of the gut shot variety, but it also gives me an open ender, and it does bring a backdoor flush draw. So this is a very dynamic card, changing this board texture quite a bit. But what I will note is that this is probably not going to be impacting my opponent's range all that often unless he has specifically pocket 10s. More than likely, aces, kings, queens are going to slow down on this card, and it's unlikely for my opponent to have a hand that contains a 10 beyond pocket 10s. I'm expecting a check back here when I check it over to him, and that is in fact what he decides to do. We're going off to river that comes another 9. The 9 of clubs doesn't change a whole lot to the board texture. If I'm ahead, I'm still ahead. If I'm behind, I'm still behind. I check it over to him with the understanding that I'd be calling almost any bet size on the river. He decides to check it back though. We show down our hand, and it is good. So, like I said, not a whole lot of craziness to this point. We're playing pretty decent poker. Like I said, I can't be complaining about that all that much. If you guys are new to the videos, please make sure to do me the pleasure and the honor of dropping a like down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, because a ton of you guys actually aren't subscribed according to the statistics. Hope you guys have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the episode, because we are barely getting started. Alrighty, so you guys can see I'm in this interesting looking room. It's the dining area for the high limit section here. Again, very interesting. Never played in the higher limit games here at the bike. We've played larger stakes, but again, just never in a private environment. Anyways, running pretty meh, we're playing okay, like what I've been doing so far, but we haven't even got a big pot, so don't have a lot of time here. I just unfortunately got a call from work, so let's see how we do. Let's play a couple more hours and head out. Thank you guys for watching. Let's get back into the session. There's no way that I can have a session going big as I am and it'd be all roses, right? Well, think again. In this hand, we're in middle position and we look down at pocket kings. This is again pretty outstanding. I decided to raise it up here for middle position. The small blind and the straddle make the call. We're going off to a flop that comes
9-5-4 with 2 diamonds and a spade. I check my hand again and realize that I do in fact have the king of diamonds. So on a board texture like this, it's really nice to protect yourself by having kings as a check back for the times that we have like ace king or ace jack or ace queen, obviously all those hands and only containing 1 diamond. That is in fact what we do. Luckily enough, the action checks through and we're going off to a turn card that comes the jack of diamonds. So now we do improve to the second nut flush draw. There are some more straight draws available for our opponents, and when the action starts off with a straddle, he decides to lead out for 150 bucks. This is a pretty interesting spot for my opponent's lead. I'd imagine that he'd be leading most of his flush draws as well as his completed flushes, and definitely leading some of his combo draws for sure, and a ton of his value. He can definitely have 5s, 4s in his range here. So there's no reason to overplay my hand because I feel like it's a way ahead or way behind type of spot. I decide to just make the call. Everyone else folds. We're going off to a river card that comes a queen of clubs. So again, not a great card as it does bring that backdoor straight draw, and it does complete some better 2 pairs for my opponent. When he checks it over to me though, this is where things get a little interesting, and I think this is where I make a little bit of a mistake maybe. Maybe not. Again, we'll talk to some coaches about it. I'm really interested to see what you guys think about this, but to cut a long story short, I end up value betting for $300, going for near like 40% size on the river. The reason I'm going for value here is that I feel like I can definitely get a crying call from a hand like King Jack or Jack 10 that had 1 diamond, and possibly a hand that contains a queen that's holding the queen of diamonds. So again, at the time, I'm thinking that I can get value from a weaker hand. Of course, this is, I guess, what some would refer to as thin value, even though it is an overpair that I'm holding. But on a board texture this dynamic, I feel like it is maybe a little too thin. Anyways, my opponent pretty quickly calls with 5-4 offsuit, so he did flop the old 2 pair. Unfortunate for us, as we're going to have to ship the pot over in his direction. I guess it couldn't be all roses, as pocket kings go down in flames against 5-4 offsuit. A few orbits pass before the cutoff decides to open $110. The button makes a call. We look down at ace 10 of spades from the small blind. Definitely can go either way with this. In the suited variety, I actually don't mind making a 3-bet here sometimes, and obviously just flatting sometimes as well. In this configuration against these specific opponents, I'm going to go ahead and play a little more aggressive out of position. Would rather take this money down pre-flop. I make it $450 to go. That seems like a reasonable sizing out of position, about 4.5x. The cutoff calls and the button folds, and we're going off to a flop that comes 10-8-7 with 1 spade and a club. This is where things get a little interesting, as now I do have the top of my range on this board texture. It's not often that this board texture will crush me, the 3-better from the small blinds range, but I think I can still have 10s and 8s as value hands on this board. Probably not 7s, as that'd be a little too low, but I obviously still have some overpairs where I'd be checking sometimes and betting sometimes, depending on what suits I'm holding. At the end of the day, after all that talking, and that mumble and jumble, I decide to bet $600 for value. Again, I want to go a little bit larger, somewhere nearing 60 to 70% size of the pot. My opponent decides to fold, so luckily for us, we didn't have to fight against too much. The one good thing that I will add is, obviously for that spot, the button was kind enough to tell me that he folded 8-7 suited, so if we didn't 3-bet, we would have probably played a pretty big pot out of position and maybe lost it. So good timing there. Sometimes just intuition just helps you out. To be totally honest, to this point, the session has gone, without many hiccups. We have been playing bomb pots what feels like every 20 minutes. It is of the no limit hold'em variety, which is definitely not my favorite. If we're doing bomb pots, I think it kind of makes you want to gamble. It's just unfortunate when you only have 2 cards and there's 2 boards. It's kind of hard to make big hands on both boards. Anyways, I guess that's the point of it. We find ourselves in a really interesting situation when we're going 8 or 9 ways to a flop in a bomb pot, and there's quite a bit to go over. We find ourselves in the big blind, 2 flops that come ace queen 7 high and king 10-4. There is a flush draw available on the top board and a rainbow board texture on the bottom board. I decide to lead out here for a pretty reasonable sizing. I decide to lead out for $200, considering I do have top 2 pair on one of the boards and a gut shot to the nuts on the other board. It folds all the way to the button, who's a very fun player to say the least, and somebody that I took great liking to very early on this session. This guy is outstanding. Don't want to say anybody's names, but I really like this guy a lot. Anyways, he decides to raise to $1,700, a really, really massive sizing. At this point, I have around 6,000 or 6,500, behind, and I guess I could just call, but if there's some chance that I think I can get my opponent to fold a little bit of equity on that bottom board, which I have only a gut shot on, then I think I got to take my options here by just jamming and getting him to fold a little bit of a better hand on one of the boards. To be quite honest, I hardly play bomb pot, no limit situations. I don't know how to play it. There's no strategy for me. I just genuinely, I just really don't know. Anyways, when it gets back over to me, I end up doing what is the unthinkable and jamming for right around $7,500 in a bomb pot that I've been playing super conservatively to this point. I haven't got even past the flop on any of these bomb pots. But against his raise sizing and considering I can maybe get a better hand on the bottom four to fold, and this time I find myself all in, or what is one of the biggest pots of my life, my opponent pretty quickly makes a call, and we end up making a mess of the situation as we decide to run it twice. And when you run it twice, that means we're running what in reality is 4 runouts, because there's 2 boards here. Anyways, you're going to have to follow along with me as there is a lot to go past. The turn on the top board comes a jack of clubs. The second top board run out comes out a deuce of clubs. On the bottom board, the first turn comes out a queen, and the second turn comes out a 9. Going back to the top board, the first river is an 8, and the second river is another jack. On the bottom board, one river comes out a 7, and the final river comes out a 5. My opponent chose my worst nightmare. King 10. Oh my god. I just got scooped in the biggest pot of my life against a hand that I'd be chopping with 99 out of 100 times. My opponent hit the gut shot twice, so he hit 2 out of his 3 outs, 2 of them on the 2 run outs. Oh my gosh. I am honestly shaken at this point, and I'm probably gonna need to just get a little walk going at this time and just kind of figure this all out, because that was a lot to handle.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what's that age? I have 4, 6, 7, like 8,000.
Yeah, you got me covered.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's it.
So by this point, I think I've cleared my mind. The one thing I have to realize and tell myself, and I want to just get this straight before the next hand, obviously that was a ridiculously sized pot. I don't think I played it optimally. It's hard to really tell, man. I mean, I don't know what kind of books or strategies there are for bomb pots. Ranges are, you know, infinite, so I can't kill myself over it. It is what it is. I got unlucky, and I just kind of tell myself that I'm here for a good time. I'm here to have some fun, and unfortunately that wasn't fun, but luckily the table, the environment is lively enough where I can deal with it. It's just really not that big of a deal. We're here focusing up and ready to bring our best game, or at least the best version of it I can. We end up rebuying for $10,000, so now we're into the game for $17,000. Let that sink in. That's a lot of money, but we still got a lot of fight left in us, and it's going to be hard to take this old dog out. There are 4 limps to me as it gets to me in the straddle. We look down at 6-4 diamonds. I go ahead and complete, check it. No reason to put any more money in the middle. The flop comes 8-6-5 rainbow. There is a diamond out there as we do hold ourselves a backdoor flush draw as well as second pair and a gut shot. So a really good board texture for us. This is even a reasonable board texture to lead out on. I mean, there wasn't a raise, but if there was a raise, this is a very fine board texture, in my opinion, to donk lead. Anyways, we check it over to the under the gun limper, who decides to bet $180. Small blind, smooth calls, gets over to me. I don't think I could be folding second pair, gut shot on the back door. So I make the call, and the turn card comes the deuce of spades, as it does bring a backdoor flush draw. Oddly enough, at this point, the action checks through, and the river comes at 3 of clubs. What the heck is going on? We've now backed ourselves into the other side of the straight that I wasn't even considering, and a ton of random draws bricked out. When my opponent decides to lead out for a massive sizing that I have not seen him use today, he bets $1,200. I'm put in a really interesting little situation. My opponent is sitting on about 4K to start this river, so he just bet 1,200 of that. He's sitting on around 2,800 behind, and I think in this juncture, I think I can possibly get him off a chop. If he has a hand like mine here, or also had some kind of random gut shot, or also has some kind of random 4 that got here on the river, I think there is some planet where I can get him to fold a chop if I decide to put max pressure. So I decide to jam all in, $4,000 to go into the middle. It folds back over to him, and luckily for us, we don't have to wait very long as he makes a decision instantly. He makes a call. He flips over 9-7 offsuit. He played it outstanding. I think he played it very different than I would have, but he got the absolute max and owned my soul. He got me to make a big play with, you know, what was kind of a cooler spot, but you got to tip your hat when it comes that way. We're in for heaps and we're down heaps at this point. It's unfortunate. when you flop a straight against somebody that just finds a way to backdoor into a really weird straight. But it is what it is. Again, at this point, things just aren't going my way. But I cannot tell you enough. I'm trying to focus myself and keep myself level-headed. We haven't even caught our full run good yet. And that's just how poker goes sometimes. So by this juncture in the game, I'm probably stuck 13 or 14,000, which is a lot. It just is. We cannot, it's hard to pretend like it's not. But considering this is the biggest stakes I've ever played, I feel like I was more nervous to start the session off. And now that I've, dusted off quite a bit, I'm kind of like just okay with it. Like it kind of just is what it is. As we find ourselves in another spot, the cutoff decides to raise to $120. It folds over to me in the big blind, and I decide to make the call with King Jack offsuit. Probably works better as a 3-bet sometimes at some certain frequencies, but at the end of the day, I don't mind just calling. The straddle makes a fold. We're going heads up to a flop that comes pretty great. Jack 9-3 with 2 spades. A very dynamic board texture, ton of straight draws, ton of flush draws out there. My opponent's gonna have like an infinite amount of those combinations from the cutoff. I check it over to him, and he decides to bet $210. This is one of the action players I was telling you about earlier, one of the fun players of the group, the one that I lost that massive pot with ace queen against. But he's super fun to play against, and he's very aggressive. It makes me think a lot, and you'll see in this hand. We're going off to a turn card that comes the 5 of clubs. I check it over to my opponent, and he decides to bomb this turn card for $860. Really massive sizing, and it would be really nitty of me to make the fold. The funny thing is that you can probably hear in the audio just a tad bit. He's saying that he wants to get me to fold all of my flush draws.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
And I don't have a flush draw, sir. I do have pretty much the top of my range here, so I end up making the call. We're going off to a river that comes literally, and I'm not exaggerating, the worst card that could have possibly peeled off. That is the Queen of Spades. Every single draw that exists on the planet Earth has come in. Straight draws, flush draws, you name it, it got there. Even a hand like Queen 10, a straight draw that didn't get there, now beats me as it makes top pair. The interesting thing is that when I check it over to him, he decides to bet for $1,700. Why I think that's interesting is that pretty much eliminates all single pair holdings in my opinion. This is a very dynamic board texture, and it would be really weird for my opponent to be going for value with anything really less than top 2 pair, it feels like. Besides that, I feel like it had to be a straight or a flush. And for me, that's relatively polar. One thing of note that I think is very important is that I am holding the King of Spades, so I do block some of his made flush combinations. I end up going to the tank for what is actually probably the longest tank I've ever had in my poker vlog career. I end up tanking what feels like over 3 minutes. A lot is going through my mind, like I told you, against specifically this player. He is super aggressive and puts you in so many tough spots that there is an opportunity that he can just have some air here, some random dust that can be settling into the sky. It's really hard to tell. And he can obviously also turn ace 10 of spades or some, the nuts against me. He just has that potential. And if that's the case, I'm not scared money. I came here with the understanding that I'm going to have to make some big calls and I'm going to have to make some big folds. So this is a spot where I have to do one of the two. At this exact moment, I'm sitting with about $2,500 or $2,700 in my stack right now, somewhere in the realm. And this would be for most of it. If I make the call and I'm wrong, I'm left with pennies. After enough of pause, I end up making what is the biggest call, I think, of my poker career. My opponent tells me,
Would you believe that I never saw my cards? I never saw them. I don't know what I have.
No way.
No, yeah, I never saw them. This is Jack. I never saw them. Yeah.
Whoa, what a call.
at this point, I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? He flips over the deuce first, followed by a 7. 7 deuce offsuit. Jeez Louise. I show down my king jack for an unbelievably great bluff on his end, obviously using his range advantage there. Picking off a bluff, which was probably a pretty bad call, but I just used a couple of live tails to help me get to that decision. And we're just gonna have to live with it, and obviously you can't complain when you bink a massive pot like that. At that exact moment, I knew I'm gonna turn the session around one way or another. Somehow, this session is gonna go in a better direction. Now that we've got a little bit of our swagger back, I'm feeling really confident finally, and I feel like I've got a better understanding for the table, and more importantly, the nerves are officially shaken off. We're here to fight. I feel like I've been knocked down a couple of times like Rocky Balboa, but I'm here, I'm ready to stand up and give my best version of this fight. This next hand, Under the Gun decides to raise to $110. I'm in the small blind and I look down at ace 10 of hearts. Earlier with 3-bet, so this time it feels fit that I just make the call. The straddler decides to make the call as well. Who's another fun player. And we're going off to a flop that comes 10-7-5 rainbow. Checks over to the initial raiser, who's going to have a C betting sizing of 120 bucks. Going around third side of the pot, definitely not bad. Hard for him to have a ton of value on this board texture from under the gun, but I'm going to go ahead and just play my hand as a call. Gets back over to the professional, as we like to refer to him as, who makes it $620, stating that this is how you win pots, by raising. The initial raiser makes a call, which is a little worrisome, but obviously folding top pair top kicker would be absolutely horrific. So I decide to make the call, and we're going off to a turn card that comes the best card in the deck, the 10 of diamonds. We now have what feels like the effective nuts here. If any of my opponents have 7s or 5s, this is what I'll do. I'm going to grab my chips one by one and set up a perfect stack for them, give them all my money, shake their hand, and wish them a good day. Because that's just what's going to happen if I get coolered in this spot. I check it over to the professional. He decides to bet once again for $800. Initial raiser ends up folding. It's back on to me. This is where, again, I think I overplay my hand. And I end up deciding to jam all in here. I'm playing about 5K effective. And I feel like my opponent can't make a big fold if he does have like Jack 10 or Queen 10 or something. So why not get all the money in the middle now before a scare card comes on the river, like a completing straight card or a completing flush card. The professional thinks about it for a little while before eventually making the fold. In my head at the time, although it's an egregious overbet, I think on the turn, which is obviously not good. I think raising here to 2,000 or 3,000 is significantly better. The SPR is just a little uncomfortable for me on the turn. I think I would have to make it like, I don't know, like a min click of 1,500 and leave myself like a 80% SPR to jam on the river. Anyways, we did play it a little poorly on the turn, but can't kill yourself. At least I'm raking the pot in and heading in the right direction. A few hands occur before this next hand as Under the Gun decides to limp. We are a few positions to his left in the cutoff, and we decide to isolate him to $150. Only the limper makes a call, and we're going off to a flop that comes absolutely a miracle. It's a miraculous flop. Ace, Queen 6 with 2 hearts and a club. Opposition checks it over to me. I'm going to be betting pretty small here as I have this board pretty crushed and locked up at this point. There are obviously some aces that are a little better than ours. Ace Jack or Ace 10 may be limping here, but I'm going to have to bet my hand for value. $120 to go. My opponent decides to make the call pretty quickly. We're off to a turn card that comes a 7. So our flush isn't getting there. We don't make any 2 pair, but we still have top pair. I can consider checking this back sometimes to play this a little more deceptively if I get there in the river. But when he checks over to me, in reality, I think my goal here is just to build the size of the pot a bit more. So I decided to bet $350. My opponent thinks about it for a second before unfortunately folding. But again, finally get the things rolling in the right direction after what was a pretty difficult session in the middle parts. Like I said, at this point, I've officially got my swagger back. We are out here Rocky Balboa style fighting until the death. I mean, let's not that exaggerated, but we're feeling good about ourselves. Things have been going on our favor, and we're running really, really hot right now. We're in the hot seat, some people would refer to us as. In this next spot, Under the Gun decides to limp. Player to his left decides to isolate to $160. Folds to me in the small blind, and we look down at pocket queens. Man, that's a good hand. Shout out to the pocket ladies. Shout out to Bill Burr as well. I decide to raise it up here to $500. Considering I am out of position, I want to make it a little bit larger, as well as there has been a limp already and an isolation raise. Folds back to the isolation raiser. He decides to make the call. We're going off to a flop that comes 5-5-6 rainbow. Very static board texture. Not a whole lot that hits either one of our ranges in reality, besides specifically pocket sixes maybe. I decide to down bet here for $280. It's nice to do this with queens. It's nice to do this with ace king. That's the point. We got to be balanced, right? He decides to make the call pretty quickly. We're going off to a turn card that comes with 4 spades. The board's getting a little more connected, but specifically only a hand like 8-7 suited makes sense. And for him to isolate and call a 3-bet, probably not a whole lot of combos of that left. So I decide to bomb this turn card for $1,200, going nearly the size of the pot, somewhere around 80%, 70%. That seems like a very suitable size to me. He thinks about it for a moment and makes a call. The river comes the deuce of clubs. As we know, that hasn't changed very much anything, and it is pretty much impossible for him to end up on this river with any 3s. So when the action opens with me, I decide to bet for value for $2,300. Shout out to MJ. My opponent goes deep into the tank, and again, this bet size is specifically targeting a hand like ace queen, pocket jacks, pocket tens, pocket nines. These are all very credible hands in my opponent's range, and I'm putting him in a tough spot. My opponent tanks for 2 minutes before eventually deciding on a fold. And that kind of has been like the story for today. Although we've been able to fight and battle back, we just have not found value in any of our really big hands. Just haven't been able to get max value or all the money in the middle in any of these spots. That just kind of is what it is, and we're going to live with it, but really happy with the way we played that hand. Unfortunate that our opponent did not make the call. I think if I was to end up on the river again, I just don't see myself betting anything less than 2,000 on that river, as that in reality it is a fairly decent sizing, and I don't need to change it very much so. And I don't think I should be changing it very much so. Yet another bomb pot to break down, but this one is a really significant one. Again, it's probably been 5 hours or 6 hours since that massive bomb pot that we lost. So there's been quite a few that we've played that we've just, said goodbye to the $100 the bomb pot fee is for every single one of those pots. But this one is a big deal. Again, we're catching up on the flop, as that's how all bomb pots work. And the flop comes out king 7-4 on the top board and queen jack 7 on the bottom board. Outstanding flop for our specific hand as we look down at king queen of clubs. We're here in early position, and I decided to lead out for $700. A pretty big bet sizing. Again, going around 70% of the pots. I got to start building a pot while we have pretty much the effective nuts. It feels like it is literally impossible for us to be losing both boards, I think, at this exact juncture. So we're betting big here. We're needing to get some calls. We get one caller from middle position, and then the opponent directly to his left, the pro, decides to make the call as well. We're going off to a turn card that comes an 8 of clubs on the top board, bringing us a backdoor flush draw, and a 4 of spades on the bottom board. So now we have a massive, massive hand with even more equity as we now pick up an even bigger draw. At this point, it's time to ramp up the aggression and get as much money as I can while I'm ahead in. I decide to bet $2,000. The effective stack is going to be my opponent in between myself and the last act opponent, who has somewhere in the vicinity of a 5,500 behind. He decides to make the call, leaving himself around 3K, and the last act player pretty quickly folds. We're going off to a river, hoping to improve or at least hold. The top river comes the queen of diamonds, improving us to 2 pair, and the bottom river comes the jack of spades, improving us to 2 pair as well. Although a jack is probably never folding now, again, it's very unlikely, nearly impossible for me to be losing both of these boards. So if that's the case, I've got to make as much pressure as I can to maybe fold out a slightly better hand on one of the boards, or what's more likely is get max value against a hand that just can't think that I'm shipping both boards, because I have pretty much the best possible hand you can have in this instance. I decide to jam it all in, about $3,000 for my opponent, who goes deep into the tank. This is by far the longest tank we've ever had on the vlog. I think this gentleman ends up tanking for over 5 minutes before eventually making the call. We show our hand. He says that is good, and we ship a monstrous pot. Well over one of these. Let me do the math real quick. That's like 10,000 right there. 21, 12,000. Shipping a pot of over $13,000. This is something that movies are written about. If there was ever Rocky Balboa film for a poker player, maybe this is our film. We were down tens of thousands of dollars, and we found a way to battle back to nearly a break-even session. What is going on? To this point, we've been on the roller coasters of all roller coasters. It's about time that I check out of the Six Flags, because you can only do so much in one day. But before we leave, we've got a couple of ridiculous hands to go over. Yes, we still haven't even ended the 10K pot massive craziness bonanza. There's still more to come. In one of the last hands of the night, we look down at pocket kings. I'm in the +1 position and make it $120. The cutoff calls, and the straddler decides to make it $320. Can't be afraid of monsters in the closet, so we're going to have to make the 4-bet to $810 in position. And I don't want to give the opponent from the cutoff the opportunity to make the call. He ends up folding, and the 3-better ends up calling. So we're going into a flop with almost $2,000 in the middle already, and it comes pretty interesting as it comes jack-8 deuce with 2 hearts and a spade. Considering I am holding a heart, I don't mind just checking this back. So when he checks it over to me, it's nice to have this as a check back, playing a little more conservatively. The reason being, I'm either way ahead or way behind at this point. The turn card comes another pretty nasty card as it comes the 10 of clubs. When the opposition checks to me, this is just one more combination that I'm now behind against. So again, there's no reason to bloat the size of the pot just yet. Depending on the river, I can go for some thin value or maybe even a bigger size bet. Just depends on the river. The river comes probably the best one in the deck. Yet again, another outstanding river in the latter half of the session, as it comes a king of clubs. The straddler checks the action over to me. There is no flush draw on the board. The only hand that beats us is ace queen, which is feasible. I go ahead and bet $1,000. He snap calls. We show pocket kings, and it is good. Another pot being drug our way. Nearly $4,000 in that pot. These pots are getting really big, really fast, and we just feel super lucky to have been on the right side of a ton of coolers by this point. And this entire session has culminated with this very last hand. Today's session has been a whirlwind. I mean, it just has been, and I'm super happy that by this point in the session, we've been able to really battle out and pretty much book a break-even session as we get towards this last hand. Early position decides to raise to $110. We're in the cutoff and we look down at ace-queen offsuit. Again, I consider easily 3-betting in this spot, but we've been pretty active, so it's nice to have this as kind of like a secret agent type flat. The button makes a call, the small blind makes a call, and the straddler makes a call, and we're going too many ways to a flop that comes ace, queen, 3, rainbow. I mean, did you guys expect anything different? It feels like we got all of the run bad juju out of the way in the middle of the session, and now it's just been getting hit by the board every single time, honestly. It's pretty hard to misplay a hand that you absolutely slam dunk like this, but you know, don't put it past me. We've done it before. When the action checks over to me, in my head, I'm only thinking that I need to bet somewhere around 30% and size up on most turns that are favorable for my own range as opposed to my opponent's. So I decided to bet $200 to try to keep as much junk in, considering this is a super static board texture, not a whole lot of draws out there, as well as the simple fact that we have most of this board locked up. The straddle makes a call as well as the button. We're going off to river that comes at 3. This is a great card because it now makes it that most aces think that they're chopping with every other ace, and that's obviously not the case because I do have the nut ace right now. We beat ace king all the way down to ace deuce. The only hand we're losing to contains a 3, and I think that's fairly unlikely to float on the flop. That'd be a little courageous, but you never know in these games, right? The action checks over to me, and I want to go massive as we mentioned earlier. I end up betting $1,300. The button decides to fold, and the straddler goes into the tank. We're hoping he makes a big call here, and on the river we have a pretty easy jam. Unfortunately, he doesn't make the call, but he ends up making the jam for over $4,000. I couldn't get my money in the middle any faster. I'm never folding. If you have a 3, like we said earlier, I will hand deliver these chips to you, sir. I'm never folding top 2 pair. He asked me if I have it, and I do tell him right away that I do have it. I have ace queen. He asks if we can run it twice, and I say that's totally fine. First run out is a 7 of clubs, and the second one is a 5 of spades. We show down, and we are good to end off one of the most incredible sessions of my life, bar none. And not just because we won, but because in the middle of the session, when things were looking really grim, I sat down, looked myself in the mirror, and I said, hey, Kieran, we're not knocked out yet. We've got to battle. We've got to bring our best game. And luckily, even if I didn't play that great, the deck was in my favor for the latter side of the session. And I just want to thank you guys for constantly supporting the videos. I want to thank you guys for sitting here for what ended up being the longest video we've ever posted. But you guys deserve it. You guys are the reason I end up playing these fun games. And let's throw it over to me live in person to see what we're feeling like at the end of the session, because emotions are running pretty high.
Oh my God. I don't even know how to react, honestly. I'm just being totally honest. I don't know how to react. I mean, first of all, the fact that the hosts of the game were kind enough to invite me, you know, that's obviously amazing. That was ridiculous, man. Jesus. Oh my gosh. We were stuck piles. At least for me, you know, I've never been stuck that much in my life. I'm just now coming into the higher stakes scene. I know some people don't consider this nosebleeds, but I don't know, in my opinion, if you're playing 20, 40, 80, it feels pretty up there. Anyways, I know there's a lot of raw emotion right now, so forgive me. I mean, it just goes to show you, it means a lot to me. So whether I lost or I won, I would have given you the same reaction. It's not like, let's break it all down. Things were getting brutal. We had a ridiculous spot where we were 99 out of 100 times we had a chop, and we ended up getting coolered in a massive bomb pot. Top 2 pair against top 2 pair on 2 different boards. We were down $13,000 at one point tonight, guys. $13,000. Are you kidding me? Do you know how much money that is? Guys, We were into today's game for $17,000, and we were out for 25,000. I don't even know what to say, how to react. Wow. Biggest win on the vlog so far, I'm pretty sure. We played our longest session on the vlog, almost a 10-hour session. Another huge wow. I'm speechless. Maybe I'll get my stuff together and we'll talk about it on another vlog, but that's pretty much it for today, guys. I don't even know what to say. This was amazing. Obviously, as I grow in the scene and I get to play higher stakes, maybe this will mean less. I don't know. I'm only human, man. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, pretend like you've been there, man. Like, nah, these stakes are ridiculous, and for me to lose or win, I think I'd still be affected to some capacity, obviously, but I feel good, man. Obviously, I ran good, so let's not pretend like that wasn't the case. Thank you so much for the invite to the private game, guys. Hopefully I can be a regular in this game. It's a good time. Anyways, I appreciate you guys as always. I hope you guys have a lovely day. Stay happy, stay healthy, and more importantly, run good to the tables, y'all. Deuces. Thank you so much for watching. We fucking came back. Yes.